Holly, good morning, good afternoon, everyone who's joined us. And thank you to Felipe and to Kamar for joining us on the panel today. We'll be talking about how and ensuring MSMEs have a voice in open data policy making. We're going to explore how micro, small, and medium enterprises can shape open data frameworks to drive financial inclusion. As you know, I come from India. India's account aggregator system has been a success story in terms of empowering millions by enabling secure data sharing for better financial inclusion. And this has been somewhat of a case study that has been highlighted all across the globe. Today, we are going to discuss specifically about MSME representation in collaborative policy design and measuring the impact. I'm Monica Jasuja, I'm the moderator, and I'm joined by Felipe from Cambridge Center for Alternative Finance and Kamar Salim from IFC's SME Finance Forum. Let's dive right in. We only have about 25 minutes, so if you have questions, I'll be monitoring the chat and I'll try to ensure that we are able to ask our panelists these questions, just like Holly said. So please keep these questions coming in. So Felipe, let's start off with you. How can MSMEs meaningfully influence open data policies across jurisdictions?
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. Good morning and afternoon and evening. Yeah, good question. And also it can lead to big discussions. Well, I think have a meaningful influence is it's such a big group. Those MSMEs, they represent a very big share of the economies globally, and there is certain ways that it could be done. Having some co-creation space or innovation offices, or I think the main thing is to ensure that when you design policies, you make sure that the governance structure is made to have the representation. No, we have some examples which come from our research when it comes to bringing the voice of MSMEs, and I think we recently have a publication about how associations, like fintech associations, how they work and how they ensure their members also have these active representations. And one of the interesting things is that the members of those associations, they do want to the associations to ensure that they have this representation, like in advocacy or influencing policy or law or regulation. So how they can do that, like ensuring like networking and relationship building, and ensuring that MSMEs will participate in like events with public actors, but I think also ensuring that the private sector is in those meetings or in those convenings is important. And I think one of the most interesting findings we have is, if you think about like emerging economies, it's still more important. If you go to our report, you can see it's almost everyone, literally almost 100% of the respondents says that their member really value the networking and the capacity building and those advocacy influence. So it's super important. This is what the MSMEs are looking for, and this is how those chambers or associations can make sure they will have this, they will offer to their members this strong representation. So yes, it's hard to involve everyone when they are just such a big group, but having those channels that allow them to have their voice is super important. And of course, the role in our case, as we are studying the digital finance market and the fintech associations as well, their role in ensuring this representation is super important, even more for emerging economies.
Kamar, what do you think about this?
Thanks, Monica. And And again, I think it's at a critical juncture. We as SME Finance Forum host the MSME Finance Gap, and we just released our new report, which says $5.7 trillion is the finance gap that exists in the space right now. So we had mapped out because as a forum we are connected to all the yes. Sorry, I think there is some feedback.
Can you please
Yes,
mute yourself, everyone?
yes.
Please go ahead,
So
Kumar.
yeah, so I think we mapped out there are four verticals we see: access to finance, access to markets, access to skills, and access to enabling environment. We mapped out there are nearly 60 stakeholders, 60 institutions, and hence, but still, SMEs are data poor. I mean, why is that? Because there is no interoperability of data, there is no capture of data, but most importantly, SMEs don't even understand the benefits of this. I think and the clear benefits in terms of decision making, effectiveness, cost savings, enhanced innovations, improved competitiveness, increased access to market opportunities. There are clear benefits to the SMEs that they are not able to decipher through. And when it comes to policy making, large corporations, governments, regulators are pretty much driving the policy making in the open data. So, what needs to happen, in my opinion, is that I think there are a few things that need to happen in terms of A, we need to involve SMEs early on into the policy making rather than being a recipient of what policies have been made. That's one. Then I think there needs to be an enhanced understanding of the SMEs of what the open data entails. And there's a role of private sector, public sector, financial sector, and the real sector in creating that awareness. So I think that's the second thing. Then you mentioned, Monica, the India's account aggregator. So running pilots like that, through programs like that, that's a great example. And there are other examples in Brazil, in UK, and there are some other examples where such pilots have been run. Then I think garnering coalitions. So SMEs are, I mean, there are millions of SMEs around the world. It's very hard to hear their voice. So industry associations, SME associations, trade bodies. Felipe alluded to that earlier. Then there needs to be regional dialogues because it cannot be just Asia because we are seeing increasing fragmentation of policies. So how do we create regional, cross-regional dialogues? Advocacy, institutions like ourselves, we sit on many boards and seats. I think we need to do advocacy, and by involving us into these discussions creates those platforms and regulatory sandboxes, other means that we involve SMEs more effectively into the decision making. And then what gets measured gets improved. So I think putting some metrics in place, some measurement frameworks in place on the effectiveness of how such policies are actually benefiting. So I think in summary, I feel that SMEs, are very dispersed entities. We need to have an aggregated structure in which we can engage SMEs more effectively. And policy, they should not be simply recipients of the policy making. They should be, in some ways, architects of it as well.
This is really interesting, Kamal, because you mentioned a lot of words here: commitment, trust, coalitions, pilots, education, and being able to understand the benefits of what we're really trying to extend to them. But this brings me to my next question. Since you mentioned coalitions, and I know Felipe mentioned about associations, and these MSMEs having a voice through a collective rather than individually. So, in this particular paradigm, since we also need to think about their education and how they see value in what is being trying to be done here, how do you think incentives or sponsorships or any such kind of programs actually help to further the objective that we have with them? Kamar, if you can go first.
Sure. So I would phrase it around three pillars. I think one is around governance. The second is around structural enablers, and the third is around incentives. I think these are the three aspects that I like to talk about. So in terms of governance, now, even within a country, I mean, we talk to many stakeholders, and even within a country, sometimes the stakeholders are not talking to one another. What to talk of regionally or globally. So I think there needs to be more formalized structures in place. For example, you can set up secretariats, you can set up committees, you can set up independent implementation entities. You can create working groups. You need to create an oversight and a support mechanism that crowds in different stakeholders. And for example, like we were working on a new policy framework in a country. We had created under the central bank, 9 different stakeholders working group that worked together for 3 years on implementing a new prudential regulation. So that helped, so I think we need to have governance coordination in place through structural, and don't leave it to chance, because it's not going to happen if you leave it to chance. I think that's one. The second is around structural enablers. You need to have SMEs or SMEs bodies having formal seats in advisory bodies and technical working groups. So they're not just represented by intermediaries by themselves as well. So you have, I mean, we have seen in countries you form a group of 50 SMEs across different, and you create constant feedback loop mechanism. So I think that's the second thing. Then having intermediation platforms, even SME association, you'll be surprised to know there's no global or regional associations of SME associations. Every country has its own structures. So I think how can you create intermediary platforms which crowds in different types of entities, even industry associations, and then putting some metrics, as I earlier mentioned, into place. Creating some structural enablers. That brings me to my third aspect, the incentives. And I briefly mentioned on the importance of creating regulatory sandboxes that prioritize SME participation. A lot of regulatory sandboxes do not incentivize or have structural means for SMEs to participate in that. I think that's one. Then preferential access to DPIs, digital public infrastructures like APIs, consent dashboards. So these kind of preferential access to regulatory and DPI mechanisms is important. Capacity building grants, I think it's not just about doing skill building. You need to create grants, you need to create mechanisms where you can not only serve the SMEs, because SME you can divide it into 20 different ways, but really go down to the pyramid, which we call the truly the missing middle or the new missing middle, the very small enterprises, the youth, the women, the agri, the rural. How do you read those segments? And for that, an enhanced amount of capacity building is needed. And then outcome based incentives like better credit scores or reduced compliance needs. So creating some incentives which are more outcome based and not just linked to encouraging an action. So these are some of the incentives that we've seen work in some of the markets, and happy to talk more about it at a later stage.
I think governance, collaboration, and obviously an incentive structure to try and address the needs of different niches. I think this is what I heard. And this is actually why this dialogue that we are having right now is extremely important, because like you mentioned, there aren't the bridges that are possible or aren't even available to help address the problems which are simply common across jurisdictions, but there isn't a unifying force that actually represents them. So Felipe, if I can go to you, what would you like to add in terms of the governance or the incentive structures that can actually help build this voice more effectively and can be addressed in governance?
Yes, well, I do believe I do believe like governance is key. If you have a good governance structure, and I second many things that Mr. Kamar said. Well, we have some like such good examples. Like if you think in the Brazilian open banking governance structure, for instance, they will have like representatives from different sectors, like from the tech side, from the association side, and from the government side. So you make sure that through those people you bring the needs of MSMEs into the table, and of course you can understand better through these inclusive governance frameworks. There are more examples. No, I think one good one is like Estonia open source a structure. They do make sure that they put public and private sector together, which and creates those open data frameworks. Then you can connect many dots together. It's such an important such an important structure. And I think APIs, to have like, if you have good APIs, standardized ones, is also a good way now into to think about how you make these structures to incentive their participation. But yes, I think one thing we try to understand here in our research is how you make, like, to bring these incentives to MSMEs to use those data rails. No, I think our last study, where we selected some countries in APAC to see how MSMEs access credit through digital finance firms, you can see there's still a big share of companies which they struggle to provide even simple documents now to apply for credit. And this is what we try to do. I think the outcome based incentive that Mr. Karma said is important. So we try to show, like, okay, what is your pain point, and then bring it into the discussion. So, like, I think open data can support these pain points. Okay, documentation is something very important, like that MSME struggle to bring. So how you make it more like clear for those players. But open banking or open finance structures can be such important. But then how you then make the step further? No, okay, you put in place those regimes, and companies can start using those open APIs and those infrastructure, or those digital public infrastructure. But then how you make this step further? No, it's not only accessing the data or making the concept based for MSMEs like such an important thing, but then how you make it a structure that you use for a better crash scoring system and so on. So yes, I think you have to not only here, but try to make to bring those incentives for this the supplier also see, okay, it can be a good for me to deploy credits for MSMEs, or to see what are their pain points, and then make it to develop into better products, or inclusive inclusive finance. So yes, I think not only incentive and structure, but how you make this step further to really bring to real world product and service.
I just briefly also ask both of you for very quick short comments on what would be some reliable metrics that we can depend on, which actually help us measure how involved or how the MSMEs get with these kind of projects, as well as, of course, whether the right incentives are being put in place. Felipe, can I get your comments first, and then I'll go quickly to Kamal.
Yes, of course. Well, there are some metrics. This is important, and I think well, um, well, you can see, like, the number, like who is using those open data frameworks is important. First off, like how you make sure, like, how they are using it, and which type of data they're providing. Is also something we have to understand, and those metrics are important to make in place. So I don't know, the number of MSMEs using this system is important. The type of data they will also they are able to provide to this to open data frameworks is important. So as I mentioned, like, one of the pain points for MSMEs is providing documents. So if you, like, okay, which type of documents you need for applying for credit is something that's good to measure, and you can also understand how you reduce, like, operational costs. So I think number like those, like, the number of the credits, like how in the last years, how how much price applications you have done, and I think those things can improve the decision-making metrics.
Yeah. Kamar, quick take on this before I proceed to the next question.
Thanks, Monica. So I think I'll break it up into two parts. I think one is what should we measure? I think that's one.
Hmm.
And then the second question is how do we measure it? And let me kind of, frame it like that. So in terms of what we should measure, I think first we need to measure the MSME specific monitoring frameworks, which tracks, whether the reforms have actually resulted in improved access to finance, whether it has resulted in reduced compliance burdens, or it has enhanced data usability of SMEs. So you measure, through a monitoring framework on this metric. Then I think we also need to disaggregate impact metrics. For example, it's not enough to cross a board, but also look at enterprise size, look at the geography, look at the gender, look at the sector. So we must try and disaggregate the data. This helps to understand that which reforms are helping which segment more or less. So we need to also decipher through the monitoring mechanism. Also, in terms of we're in this parallel, we're talking about the voice of the SME. I think how they are heard and how their policies. So we should also measure that, in terms of are the SMEs involved in consultations? Are they involved in pilots? Are they involved in any governance bodies? And if they are not, if you're not tracking that, maybe we are intuitively thinking they're involved, but actually they're not. So if we track that, their participation and representation. So these are the three main aspects which I think what we should measure. Now the bigger question is how do we measure it? I think, and I briefly alluded to outcome-based dashboards to track the real world results, meaning like increased access to APIs or reduced time to comply. I think how can we measure that, and then build feedback loops into DPIs and seeing how MSMEs are they continuously shaping the reforms as we go forward, and then evaluating the policy responsiveness, meaning how many SMEs, and Felipe alluded to that, how many SME recommendations are reflected actually in the final policies. Because if you hold the focus groups and you involve them, but actually the policy does not bring out what they actually wanted to kind of have in the policies, then I think it's just it's a futile exercise. So I think we should also see the policy responsiveness aspect, in terms of their contributions going forward. So that's briefly what I'll talk about. And yeah.
Thank you, Kamar. This actually is very important because when we talk about data governance and we talk about the data governance reforms, having their voice accurately reflected in these governance measures is extremely critical. Now, I know we're running short of time, so we only have time for closing remarks. I am also actively monitoring the chat in case there are any further questions. If not, maybe I can get your closing remarks starting with Kamar and then going to Philippe.
Sorry, Monica, there is one question
Yeah.
from in the chat to Philippe around federated APIs and if that could actually be a solution, if that's something that he's monitoring.
Sorry, I missed that. Felipe, would you like to address that quickly?
Yes, well, we are actively making research on open banking and open finance, and yeah, harmonization is such a topic that we work in, and well, I think yes, ensuring the harmonization in data rails is we are still working on that. But yes, we think like digital IDs and a good open source DPIs can be a solution. So if you design the digital public infrastructure to be inclusive, and of course having the what we are calling the regulatory delta, no, which so not having vertical regulation, but horizontal, so involving many different stakeholders or policymakers to discuss the solutions, because like digital public infrastructure go across many different sectors in the government and also in the private sector. So ensuring this harmonization through good governance is, I think, is one way to use effectively the data rails. No, like, so you can create digital open source digital IDs. You can create like fast payment systems and other digital public infrastructure, but they have to talk to each other. No, and this is something we are still trying to understand in our research, because it's a quite new subject about harmonization. And yes, it's also something we see in our as a result of our research. You know how like coordination is something super important for MSMEs and also like fintech firms. So they want to see more. They think coordination is very important coming from a policymaker, but also, for instance, the knowledge of those policymakers into like the market, it's in their industry itself. So if you have good harmonization and coordination, you start creating capacity building, and you can then harmonize these horizontal bodies to work horizontally and then bring harmonization. And DPI could be a very good solution for it.
Thank you, Felipe. I just have time for one last question. Kamar, are you still there? I don't see you on the video. Just checking. So I have a question on maybe Felipe, I can address this question to you quickly. But how do
Yes.
we take into account what and how fintech and private public partnerships can actually help accelerate some of these friendly frameworks that are designed in mind specifically for MSMEs? Because I heard we've mentioned a few things: tech, we've mentioned collaboration, we've mentioned associations, and of course, a lot of this to come together to reflect the voice of MSMEs. And in this, partnerships is a very, very important aspect. So how can some of these public-private partnerships help to accelerate this friendliness towards MSME data frameworks?
Yes, well, again, I think without the public-private partnership, there's no there's no way to create those digital public infrastructure. No, you cannot just account on one side to build such structures. And then if you think in terms of like credit access, no, okay, governments will work into providing or standardize or designing good policies for the those public infrastructure, but then you have to think, okay, how the private sector will come together and use those structure to then I don't know, afford more credits to MSMEs to close the gap, because here is where we are missing something in my point of view. No, okay, you have like open banking regimes going out in the world, and for instance, the Brazilian case is very successful. Like you have like millions of people joining the financial system. Okay, it's cool. Like using that majorly for payments, but then and you are seeing like many private sector or companies like fintech companies developing new business model. But okay, now again, what's the next step? No, what I have to measure to now, okay, offer better products. No, like tailor these products to the needs of MSMEs, because they need more representation, but maybe it's not still reflecting in terms of products they need or to access these credits. So okay, after the implementation phase, I think those working groups and co-creation space innovation offices are key to see, okay, now after the implementation phase, we need the next step, which is finding the innovation. So yes, innovation offices, co-creation space, and ensuring that those policies, as Mr. Kramer said, maybe like only having, okay, sandboxes are good, but it's impossible to involve everyone. So maybe having those co-creation space can be our feedback mechanisms can be very important for the next phase of development after the implementation of those digital public infrastructures.
Thank you, Felipe. This was really insightful, and I really do believe that a tech-based partnership and approach is going to really help us get the voice of the MSMEs in data governance and frameworks related to policy. But thank you so much to Felipe and Kamar. He's having technical snags. That's why he's not here right now. But this has been a very insightful discussion on empowering MSMEs in this open data policy making frameworks that we have. We've uncovered the importance of inclusive frameworks and, of course, industry collaboration, and what are some of the measurable outcomes that we should be gunning for. Of course, we've seen a few examples and heard from the panelists about what has really worked and how to get MSMEs at the and give them a rightful seat at the table. Thank you for advocating for these policies that will help amplify the voices of MSMEs.